Hello everyone, on this lovely spring day. We've been waiting for a long time, but here it is at last. So thanks for coming out, and let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Daniel Diermeyer. I'm the Dean of Chicago Harris. And it's my great pleasure today to welcome as our esteemed guest Governor Maggie Hassan, Governor of New Hampshire. It's our great pleasure to welcome you to the University of Chicago and for spending the lunch hour with us talking about some important issues in state governments, from the role of the government. And I think your visit is particularly timely for us because it's at the intersection of two initiatives that the school and university has been involved. And next week we will be hosting a governors forum where we have a group of sitting governors and former governors and their budget directors with a focus really on the pension crisis and issues in public finance. And then later in the year, we'll be launching our inaugural Women in Public Leadership program, which will be directed by Rebecca Sive, who's sitting right next to me. And so we're very excited about that. It's a new initiative for us, and Rebecca has been leading the charge on that over the last few weeks. So it's my great pleasure now to hand it over to Rebecca Sive, who will start the discussion for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. You're supposed to. Good afternoon. All right. Dylan knows the drill, right? Those Institute of Politics folks know you always say good morning, good afternoon. So I just have a couple of contextual remarks. I wanted to give you, a lot of you are very familiar with this topic, and I know how excited you are to hear from the governor, but so I wanted to both introduce her and set it in a little bit of a timely place. But the first thing I wanted to do is really thank the dean. It's just been terrific to have had the honor to work with him these last few months, and the prospect of continuing to do that is really very special for me and for all of us, I think, who care about this issue. We owe him a great debt of gratitude for his commitment to this. I also wanted to thank two other people who are very special women, Peggy Harper, the dean's chief of staff, who, but for her, we would not be here and we would not be together in November. And then Ellen Cohen, former dean of students at Harris, and she can tell you all about her longstanding and great girlfriend, Governor Hassan. So we'll leave it to Ellen to share what she'd like. So, or not. That's it. Exactly. So here's the thing. I thought a bit about the timing of our coming together today, and I realized that this is a really important week for women in public leadership, women who are in office, and those who care about women in office and are committed to advancing and supporting women's dreams for being public leaders. And as I thought about it, I think there are two reasons. One is it's the week we, so to speak, don't celebrate, but mark Equal Pay Day. And earlier this week, those of you who are Twitter junkies like me probably got a lot of those hashtags about that. It actually was 51 years ago that President Kennedy signed an Equal Pay Act. Fast forward or slow forward 51 years, it still takes 3 months and more into every year for women to earn the same as men in comparable jobs. And I say that to you because I want to raise a question by marking this, and that we'll talk about today, which is think about, as we have this conversation and as you think about the questions you'd like to share and ask the governor, whether you think this would be the case if more women were in public office, and particularly if more women were in executive office, in which these days, and I know the governor will talk about this a bit, is relatively rare, whether it's on the municipal level or the state level, certainly, as you know, on the federal level. And I think that is maybe the biggest question that we'll think about today. Obviously, the other big news of this week was Secretary Clinton's announcement that she's running for the presidency, and we had a little chance to chat. And the governor has some great stories about Secretary Clinton's earlier run. But as I thought about it, I realized it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you like her, whether you don't, whether you have questions about her policy agenda. It's a significant moment in time, again marking, in my view, that a stage in, I think, a revolution in the American public's view of who can be our leader, who can be our president, that I think has just really occurred since 2008. So I think that we are reminded of that and of this progress as we realize that the governor is only one of 6 sitting women governors, 5 of whom have been elected. So it's executive office is a really big deal and worth thinking hard about. So I want to introduce the governor. I had the pleasure really of talking with her staff at some length about the issues she cares about her background. Needless to say, as you probably all know, she's a very accomplished person and has done a great job in now her 2nd term. And I think that what I captured from those conversations in particular that I wanted to draw to your attention is the fact that she has demonstrated such powerful and important bipartisan leadership on budget issues, healthcare issues, economic development matters, and as her staff hastened to point out to me, on passing a Paycheck Fairness Act last year. Yeah. So that is one thing I want you to also think about as we have this conversation. I think that notion of bipartisanship these days is sometimes pretty difficult. So I also thought about that, of course, in the context of our recent mayoral election and the fact that, we are now as a city hopefully coming together and really addressing, perhaps not across party lines, but differences in philosophy about what the policy should look like for Illinois and Chicago. So I would just say, in sum, you'll hear a lot more from the governor about her background and her work and her ideas about women's leadership. But in sum, I just want to say to you that I think she leads by example and that I'm absolutely thrilled to have this chance to join her and you to talk about this matter. So with that, I will sit down and ask the governor if she would like to just say a few words, perhaps, about this issue, and then we'll launch into questions.
All right. Why don't you sit and I can talk from here?
Yeah,
Makes
yeah.
sense? Yeah. Well, first of all, Rebecca, thank you for that introduction, and thank you to the Harris School for hosting me, to my friend Ellen for giving me a great excuse to come out and visit. It's reminding me I need to come out more often, I guess. But why don't I'll start by just giving you all a little bit of a sense of my background, and then we can kind of take it from there. First of all, I get asked a lot how I like being governor. That was a question I got a lot in my first 6 months. And I'm now in my 3rd year, because in New Hampshire we have 2-year terms, so I'm in my 2nd 2-year term, 3rd year as governor. And the biggest surprise about my job is how much I love it. It is an extraordinary honor and privilege to be able to serve the people of New Hampshire and to be in a state where we are very democratic with a small d, meaning that people expect to see their governor, to talk to their governor, to have access to their governor. I'm in a state house that blessedly has no metal detectors, and I share a ladies' room with everybody else on the 2nd floor, which surprises the heck out of people. But it is an amazing opportunity and responsibility, and I love every minute of it. And one of the things that I hope people here today or watching the film of this will take from this is that serving in public office is just a wonderful thing to do. It is not only a privilege, it is really fun, and it is something that for anybody of either gender who's ever thought, maybe I could do that, you should think about doing that. The other thing you learn quickly in public life is that there is no single path to public service. And there are lots of different ways to serve. In my own case, And this may be somewhat typical of what the research shows, the way women get drawn into elected office. I come from a family that cares very deeply about public service and always followed politics very closely. My dad actually taught politics and government when he wasn't running public institutions or trying to actually implement public policy. So I grew up in a house that obviously cared. My mother was the president of our local League of Women Voters, and my first political memory is collating paper on our dining room table and stapling it for mailings, right? That being said, I think like a lot of us, it never really occurred to me that I would run for public office. I am a lawyer. I have, a wonderful husband. We started a family. We started a life in New Hampshire, and we were busy and happy. I have two terrific kids. My oldest happens to have severe physical disabilities, and it didn't take Tom and me long to realize, as the extent of Ben's disabilities became more and more clear, that we were going to need a lot of help if we were going to be able to give Ben and our family the type of life that we all want to give our kids and the kind of family we all want to have. And we were lucky because in New Hampshire, as we reached out for help, there were plenty of people willing to help. And we soon realized how much stronger we were as a family because people were pitching in and helping us. And as my son went off to school at age 3, at public preschool, and wheeled on the lift of the bus, up he goes, off he goes. I'm sitting on my front stoop, and I found myself realizing that a generation or two earlier, Ben would have been put in an institution. But instead, because of the advocacy of families like mine and the people who represented those families, whether it was as community activists or in the education system or lawyers litigating for the right of every child to have a free and appropriate public education, that advocates before me had made it possible for the Hassan family to feel like any other family because we were allowed to live like any other family. And that really is the story of democracy. Our founders had this vision that everybody counted. They didn't really count everybody at the beginning, right? But they also had this confidence that every generation of Americans would pull more and more people in from the margins. And as we did that, they understood that that was not only good for those individuals, which it obviously is, it's an appropriate and important end in its own right to honor the individual dignity and freedom of every single person. But it also had the benefit of unleashing all this talent and energy and strengthening us as a people and as an economy. And so that perspective became important to me as I grew to advocate for my son and my family at the local level. Then I go up to Concord, which is our state capital. And Jean Shaheen, who was then governor, and you may know is now the first woman in the United States to be elected both governor and United States senator, appointed me to a school financing commission. I got to know legislators, and I think it was important that I got to know the system and process in Concord in that way, because then when somebody dropped out of a state senate race in my area, I was encouraged to run. I lost my first race, but I ran again. I was pretty convinced that if I had had more time and knew a little bit more about how to go about it, that I would be more representative of that district than my opponent was, and I won the next time, served for 6 years in the state senate, lost my election in 2010. Almost all state senate, not almost all, but a lot of state senate districts in New Hampshire are swing districts, so when it's a bad year one way or the other, everybody's at risk, and I learned that I was too. And then I became governor in 2012, in my first term was the only female Democratic governor in the country. I am very pleased to report I have 2 sisters now on the Democratic side, and there are 3 terrific people who are Republican governors who are female too. So that gives you a little sense about me and about the perspective I bring, and maybe we should take it from there. Okay. Okay, that's great.
Thank you. I thought we might start, now that you've sort of gotten a sense of the governor's path to power, so to speak, and to leadership, if you might share with us some of the sort of key lessons for being a public figure and being a leader with us as you took that path.
Sure. I think, first of all, it helps enormously, and a lot of women, the research shows, come to elected office as kind of an extension of community service. And that isn't the only path, for sure, but in that case, in my case it was, and in New Hampshire it's very common. We have a House of Representatives that numbers 400 for 1.3 million people, and we have a state Senate that's 24. What that means is that we're always recruiting for the House of Representatives, because the other deal is that the Constitution sets the cap on a legislator's salary in New Hampshire at $100 a year. So that means that it is a volunteer citizen legislature. So the lessons you draw in that experience are that, one, it's up to you to make your campaign work and to serve the people you were elected to serve in the following way. Because we are a volunteer legislative state, and we are famously frugal in New Hampshire, we have the largest legislature with the smallest staff in the country. We have minimal staffing. We do a lot of direct one-on-one conversations with the people we represent. Our home phone numbers are listed. Our emails are listed.
Think about that.
You get stopped in the grocery store. You have license plates on your car that identify you. It was not unusual. My husband might be pumping gas, and they'd say, "It's your wife who's the senator, right?" And he'd say yes, and he'd tell her. And sometimes people would write down their number. Please have her give me a call, right? So it is, but it is a very direct relationship. And you learn that people rightly expect you to be listening to them and learning from them and solving their problems. So when I say it is up to you to have those relationships, it is up to you within a caucus of legislators. And now as a chief executive, in my relationship that I try to build with the legislators, to find solutions. Because the other thing you learn if you're doing your job right, and it shouldn't surprise anybody, right? The people of New Hampshire and Americans everywhere and people around the world solve problems in their daily lives every single day. They do it in their families and in their communities and in their businesses. The least they can expect is that their elected leaders will do it too. And that was kind of lesson number one. They're really less interested in which perfect policy plan you have, or what the abstract reasoning is for supporting or opposing something, than they are in, are you going to get to yes and move the ball forward?
Right.
So that's a very important lesson. The other important lesson that I feel as if women need to hear perhaps more than men, just because of, I think, the way we were brought up, is that you will make mistakes. And you will learn from them, and you will get better at it. And it is a job like any other job that requires you to learn some things, to reflect on what you've done, and to do better. And it's really important. Now, the difference is that you will do some of those things in public. And you will need to say to yourself, okay, you did your best. What did you learn from that? I think a lot about the fact that Major League Baseball players, pitchers, who get paid $1 gazillion a pitch, and I'm forgetting the latest big contract, but literally I did the math. I think it's like $40,000 a pitch in a game or something, and they will have a terrible outing, a really bad day, and 5 days later they are on the mound and they are behaving as if that last outing never happened, if they're doing their job well, right? And so that's another thing to remember, which is this is a very human process. It is a wonderfully human process, and you will learn from it. But one of the things you need to be able to learn is that you can decide that maybe you weren't at your best that day and recover from it and be even better the next time.
And in that context, can you share with us perhaps your perspective on whether you've seen differences between men and women and how they approach that issue of recovering and moving ahead and gathering?
It's hard for me to generalize, right? And so I try not to, because I think for every example I can think of, I'm sure there's a counterexample. But I do think my experience has been that women who have played team sports have an easier time with this concept than women who haven't. I don't know if the same is true for men, but more of the men who I have been in public service with have played team sports than women have, which makes, I went through school before Title IX really began to impact things the way it has. So, and a lot of my cohorts have. But I do think that, some of the research shows that women, whether it's voting or running for office, tend to think they need to know everything before they can do something. One of the reasons, and men, you are not so bothered by that. I don't know. But some of the research shows that in off-year elections, non-presidential year elections, women's voting falls off, right? And some of the research is that women will say to people who survey them about this, well, I didn't really know a lot about the candidates, so I couldn't vote. And some of the way we have successfully increased the turnout of women is to do door-to-door when they are likely to be home, talk directly with women, spend 10 minutes with them, either in person or on the phone or online, to help them understand who's on the ballot, and then their turnout goes up. And no persuasion about who to vote for, but just, hey, if you were interested, there's a county commissioner race going on. It's a special election here at the two candidates, and then they happily go out and vote.
So following up on your comment about team sports, I wonder if you could share with us your perspective on the difference between being a legislator and an executive, and obviously there's a team of legislators and there's only one governor.
Yeah, and they are different, and I loved being in the state senate too. Again, the small state senate in New Hampshire, and one of the things you should also know, I think we've talked a little bit about why New Hampshire had the first all-female delegation along with a female governor in my first term. When I was in the Senate from 2008 to 10, we were the first female majority legislative body in the history of the country. This is partly because we have this huge feeder system with a 400-person volunteer state legislature. It is also, I think, because running for state rep, you can do, you can raise and spend maybe $1,000. It's mostly door-to-door campaigning. And so I think that's attractive. It brings everybody in. The pay of $100 a year means that, it's an extension of community service, and people aren't protecting their seat for their own financial reasons, right? The other thing that's very interesting is every bill in New Hampshire that is introduced by a legislator gets a hearing. There is no power of a committee chair to put it in a drawer and say no. And even if a committee votes a bill down, it goes to the floor and has a full body vote, which can be cumbersome, right? 1,000 bills, right?
Just a little, right? Yeah.
With a very small staff again. But it means that in New Hampshire, getting a bill passed is a true consensus building exercise. There's some power levering going on, but it's, there's some, well, gee, if you don't like that bill, I'm not sure I like your bill on this, right? But mostly this is a consensus building exercise. And then within the caucus, it's a consensus building exercise too, especially because most of the state Senate seats are in fact swing district seats. So, what may work well as a Democratic or Republican policy platform piece may not actually work well for a legislator in their district. But you are one voice of many in your caucus, and there's a lot of kind of titrating, where do we need to get to a point. where we can move a bill forward. And I've been both in the majority and in the minority, and at times it's where can we cross party lines to find those few other votes, because when we were in the minority, there were just times we knew that what we were proposing was actually a very centrist thing that most people in New Hampshire wanted, and if we could get a couple of Republicans with us, we could do it. So there's a lot of that kind of tiptoeing forward and maybe tiptoeing back a little bit as you find the right place. By the time I hear about legislation, I mean, we follow it, but by the time the final legislation is done, I can be in a more of a reactive stance. So some of the job is learning how to anticipate what's going to happen and try to frame the discussion, one, so that you can try to influence before it gets to you, but two, so that people will understand what your framework is for making decisions about whether legislation or a budget is a good idea or not. The other difference is, and it's something that grows on you, is people are comfortable having diversity within their legislative body, which makes sense, right? I mean, the more perspectives at the table, the better decisions we make. But the role of governor is also the person who is in charge of public safety, in charge kind of the identity and culture and spirit of the state. And that is something that is hard to explain until you get into the position. But the degree to which people really do look to the governor or a mayor for problem solving, but also for helping people understand how we're going to get to the place we need to get as a state to move forward or to do difficult things. And sometimes just to be the person who's there to grieve difficult things is very singular.
Right.
Yeah.
And going back to what you said about sort of setting the tone and the spirit of the state, what's your process? As you know, there you are. You're the only, governor. How do you sit there and kind of sense what's going on in your state and in the communities and figure out, this is what I need to say, this is when I need to say it, here's how I'm going to express it?
Yeah. A couple of things. One, it's really important, and it's to be of your state, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be third generation. I've lived in New Hampshire for 26 years, and my predecessor as governor had grown up in Massachusetts, and I don't know how many years he had lived there before he got elected, but we had raised families there. It is important that you never stop talking with people in your state, going to things, being accessible, which in the state Senate I had a great opportunity to do. So that's really critical. And one of the things I love about being governor of New Hampshire is that I travel generally with one security person in a car, and one of them is a minivan, and one of them has four-wheel drive, and which has been pretty important.
Especially this winter.
Yeah, but it is not unusual for us to get out at a Dunkin' Donuts, for me to use the ladies' room and get a cup of coffee and have people say, sometimes people say, "Oh, hi, Governor." Other times I go, "Maggie, good to see you." Then other times I have no idea it's me. And then sometimes I came out of the ladies' room one day and one woman said, one of the workers there said, "You look a lot like the governor." and I was up north and I said, "Well, I am." And introduced myself, and she kind of swore and said, "Oh my God." So, but that is all by way of saying that, it's all by way of saying that it is really important to be talking with the people
Right.
you represent.
Right.
The Senate gives you that opportunity. The other thing that you learn as a legislator is that there are times you can, that timing and space and the opportunity to talk to people one-on-one or in small groups and in private, and I don't mean necessarily in secret, I mean in private, and there is a distinct difference. But the opportunity to have conversations where people can do a little bit of thinking out loud,
Right.
a little bit of exploring with each other, you know, what do you think? Do you think this idea is okay or not? And giving people time to adjust to a new idea is really important. So one of the things you have to decide is you may have a very good idea of what we need to do, but you know, we are a state, and I think we are a country that makes its best decisions from the bottom up. And in order to do that, you have to spend a lot of time cultivating before you're going to be able to grow. And that takes some patience. And certainly serving in the legislature helped me understand that dynamic.
And tell us about, once you've gone through that process of, you know, you stay in touch with people in
Yeah.
the Dunkin' Donuts or wherever, and you have these conversations about ideas and brainstorm. Tell us about how, when you then come to a policy that you want to put forth, or a message you want to share with the state's residents, how do you think about relating to the media?
Look, our free press is one of, you know, our pillars, and it's absolutely essential. It is important to time things well. I think of everything I do in terms of 4 priorities. How are we expanding middle class opportunity in everything we do? How are we helping job creating businesses in everything we do? How are we encouraging innovation? And how are we attracting and keeping young people to our state? Because New Hampshire is about the 6th oldest state in the country demographically. And there are a number of factors that have led to a trend of young people leaving our state, including the price of higher education at our public university and community college system. So everything is within that framework. And what you want to do is make sure that, you know, if you're doing your job well, that you've got essential support and you've got a framework so that people can understand what you're doing and why. And that tends to impact how and when we interact with the media. And of course, the media asks lots of questions on a daily basis. So again, we want to make sure we're responding, but that, you know, there are times your response is broad because, again, you're trying to give people in your state the opportunity to have a say and to participate.
And can you share with us, maybe this has never happened, but if it has, can you talk to us about crisis management and how you deal with crises?
I am blessed with a phenomenal team in New Hampshire in our Homeland Security and Emergency Management Department, along with a phenomenal team of local public safety folks and staff. One of the things that I think is really important is valuing the experience that people in your state have and trying to make sure that you've got a representation of that in your administration. So I was blessed to follow a governor who was fantastic, a friend, and a lot of people who worked with him have stayed to work with me, and that's been very, very important. I think the most important thing when you do have a crisis, whether it's a public safety one, a weather one, or something else, you need to make sure you're getting the information that you need, and you have to resist the temptation to react before you have all the information, which again is a little bit of a tension with the media. They're doing their job, they're asking, they want to get the word out, and often in a crisis it's very important. Their role is extraordinarily important, but at the same time, you can't take it back once it's out there, and so you want to be accurate, and you owe people that. And the other thing is that I think the most important thing a good leader does, besides making sure people can share your view of how you're going to get through this, is that you want to make sure that you are asking the right questions at the right moment. And one of the things that I think for anybody thinking about running for office, especially anybody running for a chief executive role, I think it's really important to understand that nobody is perfectly prepared for this. You know, my first blizzard, somebody said, like, did you go to blizzard school before you, like,
Where is that?
you know,
it's in
like,
New Hampshire.
you know, and the answer is no, but your life skills and your capacity to ask questions are important. And you know, I'll give you an example. So you find out that there's been flooding after an extreme rainstorm, and you get word that a particular town is, quote, cut off. And your public safety folks say, yeah, but you know, I've checked with the chief of police and I've checked with the fire chief. You know, everybody in town, this happens from time to time, and in rural states in particular, people, you know, there are towns that go, oh yeah, you know, the bridge washes out every now and then. And the response I initially got was, oh, you know, all the townspeople all plan for this. Everybody's got at least 3 or 4 days food. You know, people have checked in. It's all fine. And I said, does that mean that they're all fine, like, because they've got food, and if nothing bad happens in any of those houses, they're all fine? But if somebody in one of those houses has a heart attack, can we actually get an emergency vehicle to them and get them out? And that was not a question that anybody had asked, because they were so used to having the conversation that they weren't specific enough. Those are the kinds of things that you just need to bring to the role, and that everybody who thinks that they might be a good chief executive has those skills. You just have to have the confidence to deploy them.
And on this front, just to continue this part of the conversation, one of the things, and I know you know this, and probably most of the people here do as well, that, you know, it's been the case that women have been held to a higher standard than men, that, you know, sort of misbehavior, or I don't know how else to characterize it exactly, but that women fall further because the perception, at least historically, was women were going to be municipal housekeepers or something like that. We're pure, we're better, so let's be in office and make the world a better place. Of course, that's probably not true. We're all sort of equally fallible.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about whether you've had any personal experience with, in your judgment, being held to a higher standard because you're a woman, or if not, if you've had a conversation about that with your colleagues and women who have the kind of responsibility that you have.
I know that there's research about it.
Right.
The thing is, I've never been a male governor, so I don't know.
Right.
All I know is being a woman at this job, and so, and you know, I think it's important for people to be who they are,
Right.
be themselves, and I think it's important to have all the various perspectives that women and men bring to these roles at the table, and which is really, you know, the whole point of the way we're set up as a democracy. I do think that, you know, we talked a little bit about the role of leaders and executive leaders. Ultimately, good governors and good mayors, along with good legislative leaders, are really, more than anything in a democracy, our job is to give people confidence in the notion that self-governance can work. And so it's that demonstrating that you can solve problems demonstrating that even though you are within a process that tends to, at times, encourage argument or debate, which is really necessary. I mean, you distill good ideas because you've debated the pros and cons of various ideas, right? But one of the things you have to be able to prove to people is that it isn't whether you argue that defines whether you're bipartisan or not. The whole point of having political parties is to acknowledge the fact that there are different points of view and different perspectives that need to clash in order for us to find the best compromise forward. But it's what you do after you argue that matters. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think executive leaders in particular need to demonstrate that this is a human process we're in. People are going to occasionally say and do unwise things, often out of passion, often out of very deep feelings about the experience they bring to the role. But our job at the end of the day, after the argument, is to respect each other enough as Americans or as Granite Staters to find a way forward. And that's, I think, the most important thing that a leader does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And before I open it up, just one last question from me, which I know a lot of the women here have thought quite carefully about the idea of venturing into the public square and moving from community service to actually holding an office. And I wonder if you could kind of share with us your 3 do not miss. Make sure you do A, B, and C.
I would be remiss, first of all, if I didn't add that in addition to our son Ben, my husband Tom and I have a daughter Meg who is 22 and finishing up college and is her brother's best friend and is a strong young woman in her own right. And I have a feeling would say to anybody in this room, you should definitely run for office. My mom has loved it, and she probably is one of the best observers of it. And one of the things that's spectacular about public office and running for office is that you actually do get to bring your kids along to a fair amount of stuff. I mean, campaign meetings or rallies or, a lot of what we do includes children. And I was lucky to be raised by parents who made a point of letting us know that if they weren't at home with us, they were doing something that they were committed to, that they felt was really important, and they wanted us to understand why. I think children get enormous value from knowing that their parents are engaged in civic society and care about something and are passionate about something and trying to change things. And if you are demonstrating that, your kids will have some perspective about what lifestyle you have as a family and why. So one, I think that's very important to understand. I would not have wanted to run for office, with toddlers, right? That's my own personal thing, although there are women who do, right? My budget director right now is a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and during budget season, she's away a lot. But she's also able, again, as the kids get older, they will understand the great contributions that she has made to the people of New Hampshire. So that's number one, understand there are lots of ways to do this. There are also lots of people who will value your running for office who want to help in a variety of ways. And so there may be somebody who can't write you a big check but would be happy to get dinner to your family a couple of nights a week or to carpool your kids. If they want to say, how can I help the campaign? Well, you know what? I've had this carpool routine. Whatever it may be, there are people there to help. Surround yourself by people who want you to be successful. And that sounds obvious, but not all of us do that. The first time I ran for state senate, somebody had dropped out. We thought we had a candidate, a Democrat, for the state senate seat. I get a call from our party chair, I think it was a Tuesday afternoon, saying that time for individuals to file has closed, but the party's allowed to place somebody on the ballot by noon tomorrow. This is like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm sitting in my law office. I commuted an hour to my practice back then. The kids were 9 and 13. And I called my husband and I said, isn't it nice? Very flattering. But the job, your job, you know, Tom has a 24/7 job running a school. Your job, the kids, I can't possibly. And Tom said, you'd be really good at this. Let's make it work. Now, that's, you know, one of the reasons I love my husband. You know, that's an important lesson. You should be with people who are going to help you. The other thing is, if there are women, for the women who are thinking about it, and for the men, talk to the people who love the electeds, who are with them all the time. The men who are married to women who have been mentors for me have given me some of the best advice I've had, because they have watched their loved ones go through it. This is true for children of electeds. It's true for parents of electeds. Use them as a resource too, because they have great advice to give, and they observe things that sometimes we who are actually in the seat don't. And finally, do realize that it is an extraordinary human process. And so it has its ups and downs, but do know that you can have things that don't go well. You can try a policy initiative that doesn't work the first time. You know, right now in New Hampshire, 38,000 people have coverage under Medicaid expansion that just started in August, and it took us a year and a half to pass Medicaid expansion, a bipartisan bill that everybody could do. We had a couple of times, a couple of rounds where it wasn't successful. Keep at it. Keep finding ways to engage with people about the things that matter, and you will find a way forward. And that is the story of democracy. It is rarely linear. And I think it's really important to understand that sometimes change happens in big, bold steps, but a lot of times it happens with an incremental change here to a healthcare law and a passage of a fair paycheck law there. And, you know, when we first said in New Hampshire that we thought private insurance should pay for, you know, ABA therapy for autism, everybody was, you know, concerned that that was going to drive prices up, and it didn't, and that helped us learn some other things we could do. This is an ongoing process, and as long as you have a sense that you can make a difference in small ways that may suddenly blossom into big things, you will do really well at it. Lastly, I would just add, it is the most fun and engaging thing I have ever done. And other than marrying my husband and having my 2 kids, it is by far the best thing I have ever done.
Okay.
And you will be missing a lot if you don't try it.
Very cool. I'm so glad you made the point about the joyfulness of
Yeah.
your experience,
Yeah.
because there's just so much out there about it's difficult, it's a slog, it's seamy, whatever. I want to make sure we have a good time for questions, and so I will just recognize people whose hands are raised, and we have plenty of time for that. Yes, sir. And project, please, if you would.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor, for being with us here today. Are you going to endorse anybody before the primaries?
I am not thinking about 2016 at all right now. I am totally focused on the budget. I am very excited that we have a lot of great candidates coming into New Hampshire, and I like being host. For those of you who haven't had the experience of the New Hampshire primary, come to our state and experience it. It is really remarkable, and it is citizen democracy at its best. And I think we are going to have a very robust season.
Other questions? Yes, Dylan.
Thank you so much. It was great to hear from you and really inspiring. I'm not yet sure if I'm going to run, but we'll see. Right now in Illinois, we're one of only a few states that does not have a civics requirement for high school. And I've been working with a group that's working hard to change that.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe what that requirement looks like in New Hampshire and that sort of thing.
Yeah. We actually don't have a specific civics requirement in New Hampshire either. I think I voted for it about 3 times in the state Senate, on the theory that schools are free to adopt it or not. There is a group now promoting the idea that high school students should be able to pass the naturalization exam that all naturalized citizens pass when they come into this country, which I think actually is a really intriguing idea. And you know, I am blessed in New Hampshire, again, small state, right? So almost everybody lives within about 2 to 2.5 hours from the state capital, and 85% of our population lives within about 45 minutes to an hour at least. At longest. So 4th graders come through our State House and our Supreme Court on a day, they study New Hampshire history and New Hampshire civics, and it is really fun. Whenever they come and I'm there, I get to go talk to them and we answer questions, and it is, I think, unbelievably important to keep that interest and that understanding going. And so I think it's a very good idea. More than anything, though, sometimes debating whether it should be a requirement versus just starting the work of having schools. We are a leader right now in New Hampshire on competency-based education, and we got the first federal waiver to do competency-based assessments as an alternative to Smarter Balance. And we're just piloting that stuff and modeling it, and then it will spread, and that's one of the things I'm hoping for.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Governor. So you spoke initially, one of the 4 points you
Yeah.
mentioned in the state, thank you, was innovation.
Yeah.
But when the term innovation comes up, it's usually used in reference to technology.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you could speak about either policy innovation or innovative approaches to policy you've noticed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, the point is well taken. So you're right, a lot of people talk about the tech sector as innovating and innovating within our economy. And for sure, that is one of the focuses I have in New Hampshire. We are currently rated the 5th best state in the country for entrepreneurs. I'd like us to be the 1st. And we have a whole initiative called Live Free and Start, if you didn't know. Our motto is live free or die.
Oh, that's great.
We also want you to come and live free and explore and live free and shop. And we have no sales or income tax, so we're
Oh boy, we're coming.
Yeah, come to the primary, spend money. It's all good. But one of the things that I proposed in my budget was that New Hampshire should have a chief operating officer, which is not uncommon in the private sector. And in fact, a number of Republican governors around the country have them. It became a political issue. The National Republican Party started making fun of it, which is one of the things that happens from time to time. But actually within our building, both members of both parties have been intrigued by the idea, because New Hampshire government has been very siloed. I'll be a little wonky because I'm in a public policy school. I take office for a 2-year term. All of my commissioners, who are the equivalent of cabinet secretaries, have termed appointments that are confirmed by our executive council, which is an elected body of 5. I nominate, but they have to confirm my nominations, and all of the commissioners have longer terms than the governor. Okay, so now that has pros and cons to that, but the initial design of our government was a real objective of not giving anybody too much power. Our royal governor in New Hampshire was highly unpopular by the time we became independent. And it's one of the reasons we have such a large legislature, too, because he would take representatives away from towns that had displeased him. Or so I am told. I wasn't there. So that means that we have had highly siloed state agencies and governors with 2-year terms, which means really changing the way we do work as a state government has been difficult. I would like a chief operating officer to really take on everything that he or she could, based on data analysis. We now have a lot of data, like everybody, but we don't have anybody who can really screen that data in a way that will help us innovate and change within state government. My job, among others, is to stretch taxpayer dollars as far as I can and make them as effectively used as I can. And to give you an example, the state of New Hampshire spends $5 million a year on postage. My guess is that a lot of that is a vestige of statutes that said we had to mail certain stuff at a time when there was no internet and no email. Somebody needs to gather all of that data. Somebody needs to compare how different agencies are doing things and begin to integrate them. Somebody needs to think about whether we really need the same constellation of state agencies that we now have. So that's one area of innovation. The other, writ large, one of my ongoing concerns is that we're in the middle of a digital revolution. It is having the same impact on our society that the Industrial Revolution did. Most of the elected leaders who I deal with are my generation or older. Some of them are a few years younger, maybe some people in their late 30s. We do not have the same familiarity with or innate understanding of how to go from being integrated with digital technology to really leveraging it. And people, millennials, all the research tells me that millennials, for instance, want to live differently than my generation did. Want to have public transportation and live close to where they work, but still have great access to outdoor recreation. Another reason you should come to New Hampshire, because that all works. But I worry that those of us in office right now aren't necessarily seeing the speed with which we haven't somehow truly absorbed the speed of which change is happening and how many opportunities there are for us to move and change with that and improve and get stronger and lead economically. So that's a very kind of broad answer, but it's certainly a good point. It's not just about technology, it's really about what does that technology allow us to do, and how in particular might we use that technology to address some of our biggest challenges, including the kind of opportunity gap that Robert Putnam's been talking about in his latest work. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Governor. I just wanted to follow up on both the tradition and practice of bipartisanship in the state. And you hinted at a couple of factors that may be contributing to that, but I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit more about that. So are there the institutional factors? The large house, like the lack of, let's call it adequate compensation. Is it a cultural, historical roots, or is it a particular way of kind of making things work on a practical basis, like the way the legislative process works? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, thank you for the question, and I think all of the factors that you just identified are important to it. We are a culture of problem solvers, and if you step back for a minute, we are a small, very cold rural state that settled out of granite. And so we are...
It's less attractive than what you said.
It is amazing to drive through New Hampshire, and there are times you drive by, these very charming and wonderful, and you should come, villages of New Hampshire, and you think about those houses being built so close to the road when that was the only road there. But on the theory that geography impacts people and defines cultures, certainly we were a very tough and individual group of settlers who also knew we were going to need neighbors from time to time. Not often, but when we needed them, we were really going to need them. And so there is a culture of kind of problem solving and no nonsense in New Hampshire, which I also think is one of the reasons that it's been easier for women to enter elected life there, because again, if you're willing to come help, we'll take you, right? There's a little bit of a pioneer spirit, even though we're New England. And I think that impacts it. We have, as an electorate, about 40% of our electorate now, probably a little bit more, are independents. And so again, they don't identify with either party, and they are often the people pushing us to just get to yes, and they are very vocal about it. For a long time, the dominant political party in New Hampshire was the Republican Party, and they were used to getting things done even though they disagreed among themselves. And in some ways, that has raised a culture of problem solvers in that party as well as in the Democratic Party, which as a minority party often was able to find common ground with them. I guess the last thing I'd say is we are a small state where people know each other. And so the Senate President and I, the current Senate President and I, sat next to each other for 2 years in the state Senate because we sit by district, not by party. And when you have shared lifesavers and aspirin, and you talk about your kids, you know, we have daughters of similar ages, when you occasionally lean over and say, boy, your guy's going on a little bit long, I'll get my guy to shorten it up a little bit if we could, you know, don't we want to go home for dinner? That knowing each other is important. And one of the things that I think has been lost in DC, as I understand it, and maybe in bigger states where it's farther to travel, right, to get to the state capitol, is really getting to know each other. It is hard to demonize somebody if your kids play soccer together. You know, it's just, and that's part of that knowing each other and the human relationship that's really important.
I think on that note, I want everyone to join me in profusely thanking the governor
Thank you.
for joining us this afternoon and traveling here to be at the Harris School and on the campus. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much.